Caoineadh mille fáilte. 100,000 welcomes to our St. Patrick's Day service. This is the time of year when so many of us, whether we have a drop of Irish blood in us or not, set aside the doldrums of March and Lent to kick up our heels or raise a glass to celebrate Irish heritage. But the luck of the Irish, historically speaking, has been perhaps more aspirational than actual. After suffering centuries of colonization and exploitation, Irish culture, in my experience, is second only to the Book of Job in its capacity for artful lament, for poetic and moving expressions of sorrow. Throughout history, including the Great Hunger in the mid-19th century, the art of lament functions as a form of collective memory. We wail lest we forget. And there's no more striking example in Gaelic culture than the ancient practices of caoineadh, which is rendered in English as keening. Gretchen, in a moment, will recite one of the most famous long-form caoineadh from the 18th century, credited to Evelyn Gu O'Connell, which is also known as Dark Eileen O'Connell, wife of Art O'Leary. And this is a short excerpt from the lament, which grew from the grief and shock in discovering her dear husband's horse return to their house covered in blood without its rider. After the reading, you'll hear an example of a traditional keening song sung by my dear daughter.
My steadfast friend, I didn't credit your death till your horse came home and her reins on the ground, your heart's blood on her back, to the polished saddle where you sat, where you stood. I gave a leap to the door, a second leap to the gate, and a third on your horse. I clapped my hands quickly and started mad running as hard as I could to find you there dead by a low furze bush, with no pope or bishop or clergy or priest to read a psalm over you, but a spent old woman who spread her cloak corner where your blood streamed from you. And I didn't stop to clean it, but drank it from my palms. Oh, crying women, long live your crying, till Art O'Leary goes back to school on a fateful day, not for books and music, but for stones and clay. My man, the corn is stacked, the cows are milking. My heart is a lump of grief. I will never be healed till Art O'Leary comes back to me.
Oro mavatin oro ex navanwen oro macarakino oro mavatin
Lament flows the deepest when blood bond is strong. The most tender and heart-rending laments are often for dearly departed family members. Laments are the poetry of final parting. In Irish culture, it has traditionally been the role of women to perform this ritual lamentation, as you've just heard in both word and song. And this art of the wail, the sigh, the incantation of love and loss itself has been perfected as an artistic performance, even as a profession. And it's deep in the bones of the Irish. They even have their own word for this artful lament, as mentioned before, the caoineadh. Imagine the scene of the dearly departed lying in repose, surrounded by professional keening women, setting the pangs of loss and grief into song. The keen was usually improvised, arising spontaneously from the professional mourners, almost as if they had come to collect the grief and transform it into song, allowing it to rise to God's ears. Imagine the spectacle. Contrast this circle of wailing performers to the silent solemnity of the modern funeral home visitation. Perhaps the most striking for us in the 21st century is the ancient Irish Gaelic practice of blood drinking of the deceased as part of the keening ritual. It was believed that the mingling of the blood forged a forever bond between the dead and the living. It was a dramatic rebalancing of life forces that allowed the community to process the grief. You can see why the caoineadh was viewed as shocking, even dangerous. A Princeton University Press article says the lamentations of women especially are often marked as both dangerous and necessary. Dangerous because their public indulgence could give way to women's unchecked erotic passion or rage, or exacerbate the grief of men, possibly inciting vengeance. But it was necessary because a community's potentially disabling grief requires an expressive channel that would be forbidden or stigmatized among men. In many societies, women are thought to have a privileged relation to grief. And lamentation is often one of the few permissible forms of political expression that was available to them. Necessary and dangerous. I wonder if it's really possible to outsource grieving. What is it that we miss when we leave the grieving to others? Or when we try to skip over the lament and go straight to healing? Our culture tells us to be strong, shake it off. Remember that the deceased is in a better place. So you're not allowed to be sad. But wisdom teaches us that the only path to healing is first to swim through the murky and turbulent waters of grief. Only then can we hope to emerge from mourning and be reminded that grief is love interrupted. Lament is the ultimate love song.
well for him who lives with ease, with garnered gold in wide domain, nor heeds the splashing of the rain, the crashing down of forest trees. Oh, well for him who ne'er hath known the travail of the hungry years, a father gray with grief and tears, a mother weeping all alone. But well for him whose feet hath trod the road of toil and strife, yet from the sorrows of his life builds ladders to be nearer God.
We now hold in our hands the gift of life and a symbol of suffering. As we honor the power of lament this morning, we turn to the collective grieving of an entire people. Perhaps second only to invasion and colonization by the British was the collective suffering of the Irish people during the Great Hunger. In this country, we refer to this tragic time on the Emerald Isle from 1845 to 1849 as the Irish Potato Famine. All that most of us were taught in history class is that a blight came along and infected the Irish potato crop, which caused the people to starve. But this is a whitewashed version of the story, the kind we tell ourselves when it's too difficult to dig deeply into the why. Why? Why were they eating only potatoes? What happened to all the grain that continued to grow and the meat that was still being raised across Ireland? Why couldn't they eat that? Why couldn't Great Britain, who had colonized the country, use their vast worldwide wealth to provide some relief? As we've learned from our American experience, processing collective social grief requires looking at collective social systems. The coming of the blight itself was an accident. Apparently a contamination from a ship that had sailed from North America. Perhaps that part can appropriately be called the luck of the Irish. But the reason why they were so vulnerable was layer upon layer of injustice foisted on the Irish people by religious discrimination, greedy extractive colonization, classism, and toxic bootstrapism. The history I will paint here is very broad brush, but the story went something like this. The island nation had been a part of the English or British Empire for 700 years. It was one of the great ironies of history. Ireland was forced to become Christian and Catholic at the hands of St. Patrick in the 5th century. Then the Protestants took over centuries later and brutally oppressed Catholics. Talk about the luck of the Irish. The infamous penal laws prevented Catholics from holding office, intermarrying with Protestants, owning guns, voting, and most important to this story, leasing land freely. While the penal laws were eventually repealed, the inherited apartheid based on religion and class lingered on for generations, a story all too familiar in this country. In Ireland of the 1840s, the land was owned by wealthy, mostly English landlords, and poor Irish farm workers found themselves living on smaller and smaller plots of land. The potato, as it turns out, was a miracle crop for the poor. The yields were plentiful, and potatoes could be densely cultivated on small parcels of land. And potatoes, compared with wheat or corn, were more nutritious, including vitamin C that kept away the scurvy. And best of all, they were self-regenerating. Some of the potatoes from the prior year's crop would be saved to plant a new crop for the next year. No expensive seeds to buy. The potato was life for Ireland. So I invite you to reflect on this gift from the earth as you hold the potato in your hand. Feel its rough texture, grown in contact with the dark earth. Smell the earthiness. Feel its density filled with life. Now imagine the circle of hungry, tearful eyes that gazed with desire and fear on the very last potato. The last morsel before the hunger pangs set in. When the blight invaded in 1845, the extraction of resources from Ireland by the colonizers was in full swing. Vast fields of grain and livestock were all cultivated and tended by Irish farmhands, but these goods were strictly for export. As people starved, ships laden with food traversed the Irish Sea to further enrich the British Empire. The response of the British authorities was clumsy and neglectful at best. Thinking the next year's crop would return as normal led them to do almost nothing at first. But when the blight returned, some food aid was provided, including an experiment to import American corn. But there were few mills in Ireland to grind the corn into cornmeal, and even when families did try to subsist on cornmeal, often scurvy and malnutrition set in, followed by all the diseases that accompany malnutrition. Ultimately, much of the emergency aid was withdrawn for fear the Irish poor might become too dependent on government handouts. Sound familiar? The population of Ireland before the Great Hunger was 8.5 million. By 1851, it was 6.5 million. While ships laden with the riches of Ireland departed daily, at least 1 million people died. And ships laden with its human bounty soon followed too, with 1 million immigrants setting sail, most often for Canada and the United States. The great Irish diaspora had begun.
I'm sittin' on the stile, Mary, where we sat side by side on a bright May mornin' long ago, when first you were my bride. The corn was springin' fresh and green, and the lark sang loud and high, and the red was on your lip, Mary, and the love light in your eye. The place is little changed, Mary. The day is bright as then. The lark's loud song is in my ear, and the corn is green again. But I miss the soft clasp of your hand, and your breath warm on my cheek, and I still keep listening for the words you never more will speak. 'Tis but a step down yonder lane, and the little church stands near. The church where we were wed, Mary. I see the spire from here. But the graveyard lies between, Mary, and my step might break your rest. For I laid you, darling, down to sleep, with your baby on your breast. I'm very lonely now, Mary, for the poor make no new friends. But oh, they love the better still, the few our Father sends. And you were all I had, Mary, my blessed and my bride. There's nothing left to care for now, since my poor Mary died.
and she laid her hands on me, and this she did say, it won't be long, love, till our wedding day. And she went away from me, and she moved through the fair, and fondly I watched her move here and move there, and then she went homeward, just one star awake, like the swan in the evening moves over the lake. I dreamt last night she came to me, that my dead love came in. So softly she came, that her feet made no din. Then she laid her hands on me, and this she did say, 'twill not be long, love, till our wedding day.
And so began the great wave of Irish immigration to North America. Exhausted Irish settlers fleeing starvation, disease, and oppression crossed the turbulent Atlantic on overcrowded, unsanitary vessels. They called them coffin ships. Emigration from Ireland was no panacea. Even for those who made it to England or Canada or the United States alive, life remained hard for these poorest of immigrants. Sometimes their only assets were love of family and a strong will to survive. Time and again, the Irish experience shared by many immigrants is what religious educator Parker Palmer calls the communion of the brokenhearted. He writes that broken hearts, pieces shared, are hearts broken open by the love they make. Love for family, love for homeland, love for identity. Hearts cracked open by shared suffering bear witness. They bear witness as a community to love interrupted. Theologian Dorothy Sulla celebrates this bearing witness for the healing power it brings. Lamentation, she writes, is incomprehensible wailing that has found a song to sing and someone to sing it with. The experience of Irish immigrants to the United States calls to mind that of our Judeo-Christian spiritual ancestors. The uprooted and exiled people of Israel sang their laments in Babylon. Recall Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord in a foreign land? The large wave of Irish immigrants in the 1840s and 50s came to a foreign land, the America of possibilities and fresh starts, but also the land of forgetting. The so-called melting pot of American culture lulled them as it lulls us still with the siren song of blissful amnesia. Relinquish the past, your native ways, your ancient idols, and take up the new. To our great blessing and benefit, the Irish in so many ways have refused to forget, refused to let hope die, refused to let their culture be erased despite the best efforts of oppressors. The Irish remember in their songs and in their bones. Deep memory is an act of resistance, and it's a spiritual gift. Nowhere is that more evident than at the moving Irish Hunger Memorial in New York City's Battery Park. Public artist Brian Tully designed this complex of vine-covered Irish cottages. Paths allow visitors to meander through a replica of the native Irish landscape, and from an overlook they see stunning views of the Empire State, the Statue of Liberty, and Ellis Island. Walking through a passageway, people can read name after name, town after town of stories of the 1 million or more Irish who perished in the Great Hunger. And the nearby field memorializes these lives with a collection of stones, one from each county in Ireland. Memorials are memory. Memory is healing. Healing is hope. Therapist William Blaine Wallace says that memory is part of the job we are called to do as a people of faith. The Judeo-Christian witness is rooted in grief, in lamentation that remembers. Memory, he writes, has a fundamental theological importance, solidarity in memory with the dead and the conquered. This tradition of grieving and remembering and seeing the injustice that really happened and continues to happen allows us to break the grip of history that's become whitewashed as a history of triumph and conquest in this land of forgetting. Public grief led by people of faithfulness is how we disrupt the narrative that tries to hold us captive with what Blaine Wallace calls the insidious stun guns of prosperity that numb the populace into complacency. Whether we mourn the loss of our dearest blood and kin, or whether we grieve as a beloved community in the face of ongoing injustice, we owe a debt of gratitude to our Celtic ancestors. They have given us the gift of lament, songs of life written in the key of hope. May the luck of the Irish possess you. May the devil fly off with your worries. May God bless you forever and ever. Amen.